There we go, pockets done, 1 and 2. So that's the front of the skirt finished. We're now going to put right sides together with the back of the skirt, and we're going to sew up the side seams. I'm going to be honest with you, jury's out with me on whether or not I like these pockets. Just want to share that with you. I don't know, I'm going to wait and see when I've finished, when I try it on later. I'm going to see how I feel. Maybe it's just because they're kind of they're going to look a bit saggy just because of the style of the skirt, and I know that's the look, but I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments, whether you like these pockets or not. I do think it's good to have pockets on things, but these particular pockets, I'm undecided. Who knows? When I try this dress on later, I might fall in love with them, but still, to be what's the word? To be concluded. We shall find out. Right. Okay, let me zip this camera up a bit so that we can see what we're doing. Okay, you can see. So I've got my skirt panel there with my patch pocket on it, and then I'm going to get my back skirt panel, which is here, and I'm going to put those right sides together. This is, after doing those pockets, this is a nice easy stage. So I'm going to put those right sides together, and I'm just going to make sure that I've got the waist at the top, the hem at the bottom. It's very obvious because it's a great big triangle, isn't it? So there we go. And I'm going to match up those side seams, and this is a nice, just a nice straightforward seam. 1.5 centimetre seam allowance from the waist all the way down to the hem. So let's start by just matching the notches and popping a few pins in. So I've got a notch just about here, around that pocket position actually. Oops, sorry, I think I just brushed the microphone with my sleeve. Apologies if you're getting funny noises. There we go. So let's pop a pin in there, and then I'm going to pop another pin right at the top where the waist position is. Once I've anchored the notch and the top edge, then I'll just kind of put another couple of pins in between just to keep this fabric behaving itself. Okay, so there's that side seam all pinned together. Let's hop onto my machine and sew it up. So again, I'm going for a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. I'll take the pins out as I go, matching the raw edges, right sides together, and that raw edge there I'm just going to match with the 1.5 centimetre or 15mm line on my stitch plate, on my needle plate. Okay, so that's finished, a little back stitch at the end there, and you're going to do that with both side seams. So once you've done that on both sides, you then want to either zigzag together or overlock all the way down those that seam. I'm just going to overlock them together. It's a fairly lightweight fabric, and press them towards the back. Right, so we've made our skirt, we've made our bodice, we're now going to join them together. So I've got the bodice right sides out there. I'm now going to turn my skirt inside out, so I'm looking at the wrong side, and then making sure I've got the front at the front and the back at the back. So I've got my pockets at the front here, and that's the front of my bodice. I'm then going to pop the bodice inside the skirt. So I've got my side seams there, matching. And before I go ahead and pin everything together, there we go, so hopefully you can see, so I've got my bodice inside my skirt, so I'm looking at the wrong side of my skirt, and I've got my bodice inside, that's the wrong side of my bodice. So if I split these two layers apart, it's right sides together. So I'm putting the bodice inside the skirt. So the bodice was right sides out, the skirt was inside out, and then I put the bodice inside the skirt. And before I start pinning, I'm just going to double check again that I've got the front matching up with the front. So I've got pockets at the front, and I've got the front of the bodice, which is this more scoopier neckline, and I've got the back of the bodice matching up with the back. Once I've double checked that, then I'm going to go round this circumference here, this waistline, and I'm going to match the notches, and I'm going to pin all the way round. And you can put in lots of pins to hold everything in place. And those notches match up nicely there. I had to put the camera up really high so that I could get this in, so I hope you can hear me because the microphone is attached. There we go, so I'll match up those notches there. And hopefully you can see that I'm just making this big circle here where I'm attaching the bodice to the skirt. So that is now pinned all the way around there. So now just going to sew round, and this time we're going to use a 2 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, so at this point I can take off the free arm of my machine and I can post my dress, and I just start at a side seam, and I'm going to match the raw edges this time with the 2 centimetre or 20 millimetre mark. Okay, because I want my I want a deep channel here, because this is actually, in doing so, we're going to create the channel which the elasticated waistband is going to run through. Okay, so just a little back stitch to begin with, and then off I go, and I'm just matching up the raw edges. So I've got the edge of the skirt, the top edge of the skirt, and the bottom edge of the bodice, and I just want those to make a 2 centimetre seam allowance. And having removed that free arm, it just helps everything to kind of travel around in a circle. Okay, so I've come all the way round in a circle, back stitch to finish, and there we go. So it's a deeper seam allowance than what we're used to because it's 2 centimetres. I'm going to overlock all the way around these edges now. I'm not going to cut anything off when I'm overlocking. I want to keep the deep channel there, which I'm going to post my elastic through. And if you're working with jersey, you don't need to worry about that. And if you are working without an overlocker, just zigzag the edges there. So there you go. That's all now overlocked all the way around there. And I've got that nice deep 2 centimetre channel. I'm looking at my dress inside out now, and there's the seam that I've just sewn and overlocked. And what I want you to do is just press that down towards the bottom, and then what we're going to do is we're going to put a few pins all the way around, and we're just going to sew. So this is your line of stitching here, and this is your line of overlocking. If you come down 1.5 centimetres from your line of stitching, we're just going to sew along here to create the channel. And we're going to do that all the way round the waist. We're going to leave a little opening, and we're going to feed the elastic in to draw that in to create the elasticated waist. So first thing to do is give it a quick press and just press that seam allowance down towards the hem. So I've pressed that all the way down, and I'm going to grab my pins. I'm going to put my hand up my skirt, excusez-moi, and I only want to go through one layer of the dress. I don't want to go through both layers. And at intervals, I'm just going to pop pins just to hold that seam allowance down. Don't have to put too many in because it, once you've pressed it, it wants to go there anyway. Put one in at the side seam to keep everything nice. So I'm going to go around the circumference of that waist seam, pinning as I go, and then we're going to pop it onto the sewing machine and we're going to sew that channel. Now you do need to leave a gap in your channel to post your elastic through, so you're going to leave a gap, post your elastic through, and then sew the gap closed once the elastic's in place. So one thing that you can do is you can actually, where you're pinning, you could put 2 pins at the beginning and at the end of the gap, just to remind you that otherwise you can get quite happy sewing away and you can completely forget that you need to leave a gap. So let's leave the gap towards the back of the dress at the side, somewhere that it's not really going to see. You're not going to see it anyway once you've closed it up, but let's put 2 pins there, and I'll leave about a 5 centimetre gap, and I'll put 2 pins there, and that will remind me that that's the beginning and the end. Okay, so that's now pinned all the way around. We'll pop that on the machine and we'll get sewing. So I think what I'll do is I'll post my dress under like this. So remember, I'm only going through, so I'm working on the inside of the dress and I've got it wrapped around that free arm. So this is my bodice part, and below this seam this is my skirt part, which is the larger part, so that's why I've got that hanging over the edge there. And where those double needles are, those double pins are, that's where I'm going to start, and I'm going to stop at the next set of them. Now I want to kind of leave myself a nice wide enough channel for that elastic, and I want everything to be sitting flat. Let's start there. So I'm just going to sew, you know, you obviously can't look at your needle plate for a guide, so I'm just going to sew on the inside edge of that overlocked stitch, and I think that will give me about the right width. I'll do a little back stitch even though I'm coming back round. Take the pins out as I go, make sure that the seam allowances are sitting nice and flat at the side seam. And hopefully my hands aren't getting in the way there, and you can just see that I am just going round. There's my first line of stitching there, and this is my second line that I'm doing. And my elastic will just post through there, so I'm only sewing through that wide seam allowance that we made and the skirt. The bodice is way out of the way up here, and I'm only going through one layer. You don't want to sew your back to your front or you won't be able to wear it. So just going around in a nice big circle here. It's just an easy way of creating a waist channel. I'm coming back round again to the where I put my double pins, and I'm glad I had them there to remind me, otherwise I think I would have just happily sewn the whole thing closed. Let's see, I've got to make sure I've got a big enough gap to fit my elastic, but that'll do. Don't want it too big, so I'll just draw that out there and snip off my seam my thread tail so I can release that from the machine. Let's move my machine out of the way. There we go. So that's now created this channel here. So the next thing that we've got to do, let's trim off that thread, is to find our elastic, and you want to measure your waist, and you're going to take your waist measurement, multiply that by 0.9 and then add 1.5, and that's all in centimetres. So it's your waist measurement times 0.9 plus 1.5, and that is the length of elastic that you would cut for this dress. Another way to do it, if you want, is to take the elastic, don't cut it, thread it through, and then try the dress on and pull it tight to fit. So it's whichever way you prefer to do it. Obviously they've calculated that your waist plus 0.9 times 0.9 plus 1.5 gives a good result, but you may want it to be tighter cinched in, you may want it to be looser and more relaxed. So I think what I'm going to do is actually leave the elastic as it is, thread it through, and then try it on and kind of get it to where I want it to be. In fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to chalk mark, but I'm not going to cut. So I use my chalk mark as a guide, I'll pin it at that position, and then I'll try it on to check that it's okay before cutting it. That's my plan. Right, so I've measured my waist and I've times that by 0.9 and added 1.5, and that gives me 69 centimetres of elastic. So I've taken my entire length of elastic. I'm just going to measure 69 centimetres, and I'm going to make a chalk mark on it there. So I'm going to thread this elastic through, and then I'll use that chalk mark as a guide, but it means that I haven't cut it, so if I do want to go slightly tighter or slightly looser, I'm giving myself the option to do so. So I'm probably going to end up chopping off most of that elastic there, but let's see. Kind of think, why not do it that way? Because then, I mean, if you're making the dress for somebody else, then fair enough. If you can't obviously have them with you, then you're going to use the formula. But if you're making it for yourself, why not do it like that? So I've got my safety pin and I'm going to attach that to one end of the elastic. If you want to, you can use another safety pin and attach it to the other end, but because I've got plenty long enough elastic, I think I'll be fine. And I'm going to, where's the gap? Here it is. I'm going to post that into the gap there, and the safety pin just goes into that gap that I left, and then the safety pin is going to allow me to caterpillar that elastic through. Just like threading the drawstrings into a drawstring bag, or rethreading the kids' joggers or whatever. It's kind of well tried and tested method for doing this. As you can see, you know that channel that we've just sewn there, that's where your elastic is travelling through. So we're just going to carry on through there until we get all the way around to the other side, and then quite exciting bit, because I'll actually nip upstairs and try the dress on, and then just check that elastic length that I've measured is right. Or when you get to the side seams, you're going to have a bit of a wiggle to get your pin through there, so just sort of squash it open and pop it through. It's just where all the side seams are. It's going to resist threading itself through there a bit. Just give it a wiggle. Right, I should be back in a mo once I've gone all the way round. There I am, back out again at the other side. So there are my two ends of my elastic. I just need to draw that around there. Okay, so let's take that pin off. I think what I'm going to do is, there's my pink chalk mark, so it's like, I want it to be like that. Actually I want it to overlap a bit, don't I? There you go, so there's my little overlap there. Okay, so there's my pink chalk mark. I should just cross that over by 1 centimetre, and I should just put a holding stitch in there, and I can always strengthen this in a minute, but I'm just going to put that there so I can try it on. And I'm not going to cut it, I'm just going to leave it dangling. This stitch will be easy to undo. That's just to hold it in place, just whilst I try it on. Just did a couple of stitches forward and a couple back, and I can always undo that in a minute. If that fits nicely, then I'll chop the rest of the elastic off, and I'll go back over that with a bit more gusto. But for the time being, that's just to hold it in place so that I can try it on without fiddling around. So, trying on time, woohoo! Right then, so I've just tried that on and it fits perfectly. So, that's a good amount of elastic. I am now going to, what I'll do is I'll undo that bit and chop it down, and then I'll make sure that everything's not twisted. And once you're sure that that's nice and flat and not twisted at all, Then just going to pop that under the machine and stitch that together properly. So there we are, that's now well and truly stitched in place, and we can just pull that back into the waistband. And then of course the next thing that we need to do is, you've got your gap there that you left to tuck your elastic into, so we'll just have to pop that under the machine and sew that gap closed. So you just want to flatten out the fabric to either side, and then you're just going to join up from where you left off down to where you started, just to close that gap. There we go. So I've got my dress under my machine again as it was before. I'm just going to lower my presser foot so that the needle is hovering above where I left off, and I'll hand wind my needle down just to check that I'm going in the right place. And then I shall just do a couple of back stitches, and then I'm just going to finish by joining back up to where I was before. Another back stitch to finish, draw that off, and that gap is now closed.